on to David.
Much, Eddie. Welcome to all of the listeners, and we're really excited for this great group of panelists. Just before we begin, I did want to make a note about the interpretation that we have available. So here, if you are on the Zoom link, you can click below on your dots. There's a globe where it says EN for English or for Spanish, ES. So you can have Spanish interpretation there. If you're on the Facebook Live event, just click on the Zoom registration, washingtonblade.com/Latinx, and you can access on Zoom the Spanish translation line. So para decir en español, tenemos interpretación en español esta noche. Se puede usar en Zoom, abajo dice inglés y español, y puedes escuchar esa presentación en español también. So thanks so much, everyone. My name's David Perez. I'm here, one of the founders of Unión Equals Fuerza Latinx Institute. You know, we meet every January to bring together queer Latinx gente to build power, to build relationships, to move our work forward. We'll be doing that virtually next year, but I'm super excited to be here with Latino Equality Alliance, Washington Blade, Hispanic Federation, and Los Angeles Blade to bring together some amazing queer and trans Latinx gente to talk about how do we build our power, how do we get out the vote, how do we make change. So thank you so much for being here today. Welcome. And I will pass it over to Eddie, who will introduce today's moderator.
Okay. We still have one more welcome. Introduce Michael from Washington Blade.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting us to take part in today's very important roundtable. My name is Michael Lavers. I'm the international news editor for the Washington and Los Angeles Blades. Gracias a todos para venir aquí para participar en la mesa redonda hoy. And I'll keep my remarks very brief. We are 20 days from the election. And I don't have to tell all of you all, but you know, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. There's so many important issues that are before us, whether it's immigration, whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's decency in the White House, whether it's moving forward with the future of our country in which we all want to live. And so it's really important for the Blades to be here today to support this discussion and to really touch upon what the next 4 years of our country could very well look like after November 3rd. And so thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for inviting the Blades to take part. It's an honor and a privilege for us to be here. And I would like to pass it along to my very dear friend, Tony Lima of Ariana Center. So take it away, Tony.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bienvenidos a todos. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Thank you so much for being with us today. I am Tony Lima, and I'm very proudly the Chief Operating Officer of Ariana Center of Florida. And we're focused on very simply uplifting the lives of trans Latina women in the state of Florida. And it's my pleasure to be here representing my wonderful organization and the important work that we do in their community. And it's also such an important time to be having this conversation. As Michael said, we are just days away from the election. So the queer and trans Latinx vote is the most important thing as Latinx people that we could be talking about right now. Why? Because we are at a moment where our lives absolutely depend on this coming election. So it's important for us to not only go out and vote ourselves, but also inspire those around us, our familias, our friends, our vecinos to also go out and vote. We've assembled an amazing panel of experts today that I'm very happy to call a lot of them my friends that run the gamut nationally when it comes to queer and trans Latinx advocacy. And at this time, please help me welcome them. We're going to start off with Maria Roman Taylorson, who's the Vice President and Chief Operation Officer of the Trans Latina Coalition. Hi, Maria.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation.
Thank you for being with us today, Maria. We now have Rodrigo Heng Leitner, the Deputy Executive Director of the National Center for Transgender Equality. Hey, Rigo.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much, Tony. And thanks for all of y'all for having me and for tuning in. I'm so excited for this.
Thank you. Next, we have Kimberly Inez McGuire, who's the Executive Director of URGE, or Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. Hola, Kimberly.
Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm so excited about this great panel.
Fantastic. We'll move on to Daniel Valdez, who's the Director of North Carolina and Mid-South Operations, Hispanic Federation. Hey, Daniel, how are you?
Hello, hello. Buenas tardes. Thanks, Tony, and I'm really excited for the conversation.
Fantastic. We're excited too. And last, but certainly not least, we have Luis Ortiz Fonseca, who is the founder of the Gran Varones Project. Hey, Luis, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. You know, it's the Hump Day, so what better way to spend it with other amazing folks talking about what we can do for our communities.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Luis. So now, before we start this portion of the program, just a little bit of housekeeping and guidelines as we enter this portion of the program. I'll ask several questions of the panelists. Panelists, you'll have 2 minutes to answer each question, and I will prompt you to answer each question. For the audience watching, you too will have the chance to ask your questions via our Facebook feeds and on Zoom. If you've registered, please pose your question in the chat box within the Zoom platform. And if you're watching on Facebook, please ask your question via the feed, and all feeds are being monitored for your questions. So please make sure that you do so. And with that, let's get this program started. So let's start with our first question. The first question is, this has been a difficult year for all of us with a pandemic, racial injustice, and the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. How do you personally feel as an activist, leader, and human being in 2020? Let's begin with Rigo.
Ooh, going first. All right. Well, thank you for the question. I mean, it's been an incredibly hard year. It's also felt eternal, by the way. I'm like, that was all in just this one year. I don't know what's going on. But it's also been weirdly very motivating at the same time, because we are all organizing to change the conditions on the ground. Like, what makes, I think, 2020 so different than past years is not just all the terrible things that have happened, but also the uprisings, the way that so many of us are actually fighting back. I mean, in past years, terrible things still happened, but they almost weren't talked about as much. We weren't organizing as much. There's always been activists throughout time, but I do feel like there's something unique happening right now where our communities are getting together and fighting back in just such a strategic way. I mean, looking at an event like this, I mean, here we have a whole virtual room full of Latinx leaders working on getting out the vote, doing live interpretation. Shout out to our interpreters. Thank you for doing that hard work. And I mean, like, we didn't always have spaces like this, but we're making those spaces for ourselves now in 2020. So it's been a hard year. I'm not trying to deny it, but I think that we're all really organizing and fighting back and being smart about using the election as a way to win the election, changes in the White House, but also really build our power as a community so that we're even stronger next time around. So I'm really excited despite everything that's going on.
You know, Rigo, that's absolutely right. That's why it's important to have forums like this, because when we're all together and we're having these conversations and we see the power that we actually have, it really is palpable. Maria, the same question for you.
You know, I am hopeful. I think that we have all been through a lot the last 4 years. Challenging to see some of the things specifically that benefit people like me roll back. And I think that the fact that I'm actually part of this panel, it shows progress. I think that women like myself really were not really included in discussions about politics. We traditionally see trans women who are white, who are, you know, in this type of positions, but to be a trans woman really speaking about the importance of the vote for our community, it's in itself groundbreaking, right? To be here, to be in the position of leadership that I am. I'm the vice president of a trans-led organization. That is something that I dreamt about 20 years ago, and it has actually happened, and we're here, we're leading, creating our own programming, leading our own efforts to help our people. So I am hopeful. I think that about 6 months ago, I was kind of sick of the whole thing, to be honest. And I think as I see this judge being appointed, I'm concerned, and I think it takes for us to be a little afraid and on edge to really be able to activate our own people. And I think that has happened. I'm hopeful that people will go out and vote. I am still challenged by LGBT folks that support the efforts of this administration. It baffles me. But we're moving on. We're gonna make some stuff happen in November 3rd. So I'm excited.
Thank you, Maria. Kimberly, same question. How do you personally, feel as an activist leader and human being in this moment in time?
I will say I'm feeling energized by this panel so far, and really appreciate just the sort of life that we're breathing into this conversation already. I'll also be very honest. I think, like many of us, there are days where I feel like I'm tired in ways and parts of my body that have never been this tired before in my whole life. And I think about, for the struggle of movement work, the struggle to survive, as queer people, as women, as people of color. I think about, there is not a single Latinx family that I know that has not been touched by this pandemic. I mean, the number of, Latino lives lost, of Black lives lost, of Indigenous lives lost, these are, this is our familia, right? And so I want to be really clear, like, that weight and that pain and that grief, I feel that, and I feel that, in my own life, and I feel that for so many people that I love. And I will say that what pulls me out of the tired is when I feel really inspired. And in particular, when I think about, I have the privilege to lead Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. We are a young people's organization. And so every single day, I witness how young people against all odds are marching and resisting and protesting and demanding and building before our eyes a different world. And that gets me up out of bed in the morning. That is what helps me kind of keep going through, what feels like challenge and uncertainty. And, and I think it's that incredible resistance, particularly by young people, that fills my heart back up.
Thank you, Kimberly. Louis, it's your turn.
I don't know if I could say anything. I completely agree with everyone. I'm living my life hour to hour. You know what I mean? I think I've killed a couple of plants because I'm like, I can't wait to water them again. Turns out you can't water them every hour. I think that, like everyone else, tired, inspired, and also disorienting. I do a lot of archiving and talk about history through the lens of music and pop culture. And it's weird to still talk about the AIDS epidemic, right? And then somewhat live in a parallel to it, right? It's kind of like this orienting thing, but also this strong reminder of just how important our stories are and how we remember and how we tell what we are living through and what we're surviving in the moment. So I think that that's where I am. And I think that the virtual space has definitely opened up, where I think like a year ago, definitely when Gravarones started, I think that folks, I'm just gonna say my experience was that it was just seen as a cute project that was on the internet, right? Because when weighed and compared to what people are doing on the ground, I think people minimize digital organizing. And then the world collapsed March 13th, and everyone had to pivot to virtual organizing. So I'm inspired that folks are occupying different kind of ways and pivoting to new and creative ways to reach our community, particularly those who don't necessarily have a way to plug into the work. I think now people have plugged into the work in ways that they haven't been able to just like 7 months ago. And, like Kimberly said, that's largely due to the power of young people.
Thank you, Louis. And finally, Daniel.
Well, I will echo a lot of the things that were said as well. This has been certainly a roller coaster of emotions for this year. We have seen how this pandemic has disproportionately impacted our Latinx and Black siblings across the country. And, in some ways, we have seen the work so many of us have engaged validated in the sense that, a lot of us, particularly, at the Hispanic Federation, we have always believed that farmers, that construction workers, that hotel staff, that servers, hospital workers, they all are essential to our community, right? And this pandemic has forced us to really face that reality and appreciate sectors of our community that we have so often forgotten about. And I hope that we take this opportunity to really think about how we honor that by continuing to advocate for things like better wages, better working conditions, and overall respect for our workers that are, really on the front lines every day. This pandemic has also stirred a lot of anger for me in particular because it continues to expose the inequities that have existed in our Latinx, queer, Black, and low-income communities, right? When we think about our collective health, our education, our income, our housing, all of those have been impacted negatively by COVID. And we know that COVID sort of exposed that, but the root of those inequities are based in systemic racism and in xenophobia and white supremacy. And so I think that there's a lot of work that we need to do. And we saw this, with how we witnessed the horrific murders of Breonna Taylor, of George Floyd, and over 30 trans siblings this year alone. And so I think that there are a lot of families that are suffering, and that creates a lot of anger because we're seeing the system of oppression that's happening in our country. On the other end, I also feel hopeful that our communities, particularly our Latinx and queer communities, are waking up to just how much is at stake during this election, and that we have a significant role to play in helping set the course for future generations of Americans. And I think that youth in particular have inspired me and have given me the fuel that I need to keep going. So it's been a range of emotions for sure.
And that's a lot of the reason why we do the work that we all do collectively, right? For those next generations, the generations to come. I want to remind our audience that if you have any questions for our panelists, please share them on the Facebook feed. If you're watching us via Facebook, if you're on Zoom, you're free to share them in the chat box. So on to our next question. Why do you think these elections are critical for our queer and trans Latinx community members? And what's at stake for us this election? Maria, we'll go with you first.
Thank you. I want to take this opportunity to sort of send our love to all the trans community in Puerto Rico. They've been going through so much this year with the ongoing murder. So I'm sending my love to mi gente in Puerto Rico, to all the trans people. But as a trans person, these elections are critical for our survival. It's not only the presidency, but our health is on the ballot. Us living authentically is on the ballot. We've seen that this administration has tried to roll back every advance that we have done in the last 20 years, from the military ban. So it's important that we realize that this really matters, that in essence, we have to take a stand. I know that it is easy for me to tell my people, hey, go out and vote, make it a priority to go out and vote, when they're trying to figure out when they're going to get their next meal, where there's so many issues that are affecting the community. It's that I see day to day in our center. We see people that come in that are navigating a system that has been created to really just not include them. So it is, I come from a place of privilege, because I have a stable home, I have a job, I have these things that many people in our community don't have. So it's easy for me to say, take time of trying to survive to go out and vote. But it is critical for us to be able to really create an impact on these elections. At the same time, I want to call out folks within the LGBT community. The atrocities that are happening to our community go unnoticed, go unshared. It's stuff that we don't share. We see how we celebrate Coming Out Day. We see how gay men take a hashtag and make it theirs. But you know, we're dying. We've been dying between 20 to 30 trans people every year in the United States and Puerto Rico, around the world. Where is the outrage? You know, we see ongoing, and I'm glad that I'm part of this efforts today, but traditionally you don't see people like myself included in advertising, in efforts, in outreach. We vote too. So I thank you for including me in this. I tell my people who are trans that are seeing this, I feel you, I see you. We must take up space. You must take up a space. You must demand what you need. We must also vote. So, you know, and please, we need support. We need support to get our message out there. Our people are dying, and there's such ambivalence to the lives of Latinx people in this country that it really just breaks my core.
Thank you, Maria. Rigo, you're up.
I agree 100%. I mean, really, our lives are on the line here, and that's not a metaphor. I mean, at least 30 transgender people have been murdered in the United States so far this year. I say at least because that's only the violence that is reported in the news. And we know that not everything gets reported. We know that more people are even forgotten beyond that. And when we think about what are the reasons for that, like what are all the contributing factors, there's so many that it's hard to really know where to start. But one that I would just lift up, could list 500, but we got to keep it short. So one that I would lift up is healthcare. I mean, Maria alluded a little bit to this, but you know, Trump is really systematically trying to chip away at all of the healthcare access that we have. And being transgender is technically a pre-existing condition. Like straight up just being trans means that you have a pre-existing condition. It was only because of Obamacare, because of the Affordable Care Act, that insurance companies were told you cannot deny health insurance to someone just because they happen to be transgender. Now Trump is in office and the Trump administration is peeling away at the Affordable Care Act every possible way that they can think of. So, I mean, truly, it is no exaggeration to say that our ability to even just have insurance, sorry, talk with my hands, classic Latinx person, I muted myself. But yeah, like our ability to get health insurance at all, let alone whether or not we can afford it, whether or not we have enough money for it, but even just to qualify for insurance at all is truly on the line. Like that is whether we as transgender people are able to get health insurance at all in any circumstance is going to change whether Biden or Trump win these elections. And that's going to change depending on who shows up to vote. Like it is really about who actually shows up, who mails their ballot in, who stands in line to vote early, whether you vote on election day or early or through the mail, however you vote. Like if you are eligible, please do it, because those of us who are trans, who are just trying to be able to still see a doctor in the middle of a pandemic, our ability to do that is on the line with this election.
Thank you, Rigo. Louis, why are these elections critical for our communities and what's at stake for us during this election?
You know, I have to be transparent. Like voting has always been like this thing I thought about every 4 years, right? Like city council happens, the governor happens, and I do my posts, I get out there and vote, but I'm never like really sure if I'm gonna go. Part of it's like, you know, I think that's the socialization of being disenfranchised. I think Maria also explained like being exhausted with the process. Like I can't be disappointed with the things that impact me directly and then participate in something outside of the things that impact me directly and be disappointed by that as well, right? But I think what's happened over I did vote 4 years ago. I think that's when it started to change for me. Like, oh, the reason why we can't get this grant, it is because of this policy. And this policy is in place because of this. I had never made that connection before, right? I would always dismiss, say, I'm not a policy person. Those people have their own language. Just keep them out of my damn office, right? I think part of it is because I didn't understand how it worked, and no one really took the time to explain it to me. I think the assumption was if I was political or radical, I understood those connections, and I didn't. And it took a lot of work and reading and being humble to ask questions 4 years ago. And I think over the last 4 years, that's what I've been attempting to do to repay that, or to pass that forward and explain it to family members why it's important. Instead of saying, you're voting for who? Or you better get out there and vote, Bendeja. Like, why are you taking so long? Like, really sitting down and explaining like how it impacts me. Maybe the issues are not necessarily important for them right now, but if they say that they love me and they care for me as a person living with HIV, as a queer person, as a queer parent, then I want to communicate why this is important for me, with the hopes that they can connect why it's important to them. So I think it's important because the world is already collapsing, right? And we know, I know that it sounds cliche for us to say we're the ones that we are waiting for. And it's clear, if there's anything that 2020 has taught me, it is that we are the ones who are legitimately and literally going to swim out into the ocean to save ourselves, right? And that requires communication. That requires for me to, as I'm swimming to the person I'm trying to save, to tell them that I'm coming. Do not be afraid. I'm going to reach out to you. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab you. And I think that that's why it's important now. It's going to require us to have deeper and more intentional conversations with our community, as opposed to us just talking to them and demanding that they do something, as opposed to explaining why it's important that they do something, because they are as important as the people that they see on TV or the people that they are told are leaders in their community.
Thank you, Louis. Kimberly.
Louis, I so appreciate what you were sharing about, it's how important it is that we talk about how these elections actually have a real impact on people's lives. And I think part of the problem is there's so much focus on the White House, there's so much focus on, national elections. And, I'm not discounting that matters, but we don't talk enough about the state legislatures. We don't talk enough about these down ballot races. And, most of our work is in the South and the Midwest. And something that I believe very deeply is that we all have justice at home, which means that if you are queer, if you are trans, if you are an immigrant, you should not have to feel like your home is a hostile place, or like somehow you're supposed to move to a blue state or a coastal city, which, by the way, is not an option for most low-income people, which we know a lot of queer and trans people of color are. And so in order to get justice at home, we have got to look at these state legislatures. Just in the last 2 years, we have seen state legislators that want to ban abortion. We have seen state legislators that want to institute and expand sex ed that does nothing more than force a teacher to get up in front of a classroom and say that being gay is wrong, that being trans is wrong. This is in our laws. We've seen state legislatures that want to create safe havens for discrimination, to roll back marriage equality, to make discriminating against queer and trans people, acceptable. So that is what is at stake. And on the other side, there is so much opportunity if we have decision makers, including decision makers who are queer and trans and young and Latinx and Black and Indigenous, that it's actually, we need to be getting our own communities into these places of power. And it comes down to this: are our state legislatures, which have so much power over our day-to-day lives, are they going to be fountains of progress, or are they going to be engines of hate?
Thank you, Kimberly. Daniel, you're up. Last but not least.
Yeah, you have me going after Kimberly. That's tall order.
That was a drop the mic moment, right? Just like drop the mic.
Exactly. We have seen our Latinx and immigrant communities vilified, our trans and queer communities used as scapegoats to win elections. And we have an opportunity to change that in this upcoming election, to let them know that those kinds of divisiveness is not going to work, right? If we all vote, particularly in important states such as North Carolina, where I'm based, we can ensure that elected officials, regardless of their political affiliation, take our communities seriously, that they understand that we need equal access to education, to health, to economic mobility. That is really what's at stake for us, right? We also need to send a clear message to our elected officials that our country cannot roll back civil rights protections to our queer community, to our immigrant communities, right? That message starts on election day, on November 3rd. There will be many different offices that we will have an opportunity to vote for, and they are all very much important, from city council, county commission, state legislatures, governorships, to federal elections. All of that matters because a lot of what we're talking about here, a lot of the ways that our lives are being impacted are by local county commissions or by state legislatures. So it's really important to not just think about what's at stake federally, but also what we can do locally to really move the needle. And in a lot of places, we've seen races come down to a couple hundred votes. And I think that that we have plenty of queer and Latino folks all over this country that can make a decisive vote that's going to really make life better for many of us.
Thank you, Daniel. On to the next question. What are you doing in your community to energize, mobilize, and get out the vote? And how can attendees get plugged into such efforts? What advice would you give? Second part of the question, what advice would you give first-time voters? Kimberly, we'll start with you.
Oh my goodness, I love this question. So, our work is focused on mobilizing young people to engage all year long, right? It's not just about an election, but I want to speak specifically to the work that we're doing, engaging with young voters of color in Texas, in Alabama, and in Ohio. And it starts with meeting young people where they are. So something that we've seen a lot this election that we're not down with at Urge is voter shaming. And this idea that somehow we can shame our community members into voting. And look, we know shaming does not work for sex, drugs, or voting. It does not change people's behavior. What it does is it pushes people into the shadows. And unfortunately, young people have been so vilified as not voting enough or not voting the right way, that they've been marginalized and pushed into the shadows, even by people that are supposed to be on our side. And so first and foremost, what we're doing is we're talking to young people, do they want to vote? If they don't, why, right? How have they been impacted by disenfranchisement? If they do, we work with them to make a plan, and the plan goes beyond election day, right? It is about voting, but it's also about, the day after election day, we are going to be there for you. We are creating political homes for young people and spaces where they can work on the issues that matter to them all year long and in ways that really impact their communities very deeply. The advice I would give for first-time voters is, this is a very isolating time, but try to use it as an opportunity to connect with people. So whether that's like, everybody's got 75,000 group texts going and group chats going, talk about your voting plans with your friends. Send pictures of, oh my gosh, I waited in line for this long, right? Oh, your friend's waiting in line across town, send them a pizza, right? Even socially distanced, there's ways that we can make this about connection and an opportunity even to have that heart-to-heart conversation, really what are you voting for, right? Beyond the talking points and the slogans, people are voting because of who they love and because of who they are and the world they want to build. And so I think so much more than filling out a box or pressing a button, it's an opportunity to talk about the things that matter to us as a community.
Thank you, Kimberly. Danielle, we'll go with you next.
Great, thank you. I also too love this question, and I'm going to use it to plug in some of our resources that we have at the Hispanic Federation. Over the past 2 decades, no other region in the country has experienced as much growth than the South. As someone that works here in the South in North Carolina, we've seen that Latinos have been fueling that growth in population. We're now over 23 million Latinos in the South. And so the Hispanic Federation is working around the clock in states like North Carolina and Florida to ensure that we help provide Latinos with all the tools that they need to become a voter, and not only to become a voter, but to go out and vote and understand how they can do that. So one of the things that we've done because of COVID, we really had to shift everything, right? And really, how do we meet people where they are? How do we get into their homes to talk to them about how important this is? And so we've had a lot of success with our hotline. So we have this bilingual hotline. So if you're watching this and you need information, or your abuelita, your tias, your parents, they want to talk to someone about voting, you can call 1-844-432-9832, and we'll share this in the chat as well for folks. But this hotline has been a way for folks to get information about how to register to vote, where they can go vote, what are the things that they need. And so all of that information is really something that we're providing to folks in our hotline. And if you're a first-time voter, my advice is to make a plan to vote, to make sure that you have the right polling location and you verify where you're supposed to go and vote, and to go and vote. Don't forget to take your mask and your hand sanitizer and all your PPE so you can feel safe when you go out to vote, if you're deciding to vote in person. And once you have voted, take a selfie with your I voted sticker and send it out to everyone on your social media so folks know and get excited about it. So those are some of the things that we're doing, and we're hoping to engage as many more folks in this process as possible.
Those are fantastic tips to get engaged, and like Kimberly said before, to really make this a moment of connection during this election cycle. Rigo, you're up. Same question.
Well, I love what Kimberly and Danielle both talked about, of like making voting easy feels like the theme. You know, I agree that shaming people is just not a great strategy in general. Let's avoid that as a tactic. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't vote because they don't know where, or they don't know what hours it's open. This happened to me one time years ago. I'm a professional activist. I went to vote one time for a mayor's race. It was at a weird time. You know, the mayor was the only thing on the ballot, so there wasn't a lot of attention. I showed up to vote and the place had already closed. I thought it was open an hour later than it was. And I'm a professional activist. If I can't get the voting time right, I do not judge anyone else for not getting it right either. The system is making it hard by design because voting matters. That's why they're trying to make it hard for us. So our job, I think, as activists is to make it as easy as possible. So for NCTE, we also have some resources to try to make it easy for transgender people in particular, but it's open to anyone to use. First, when it comes to registering or checking your registration, I recommend people go to whenweallvote.org/NCTE. So again, that's whenweallvote.org/NCTE. You can register right there, and you can also check your registration. This is especially important for transgender folks because if you have updated your name or gender on one form of ID, maybe on your driver's license, it may or may not have automatically updated on your voter registration. It depends on where you live. It's different in every state. So if you've updated your name on any kind of IDs, check your voter registration. If you've moved, check your voter registration because your address is on there. So, and you know, when we move, there's some things that we know to do. We know to update our driver's license, but we sometimes forget about the voter registration. And don't be embarrassed about it. It happens to all of us. So yeah, check your registration. Even if you voted recently, just take 30 seconds. It's super fast. Again, that's whenweallvote.org/NCTE. And I would say for first-time voters, vote with friends. You know, voting through the mail is usually the easiest. Everyone's situation is different, but for most people, voting through the mail is super easy. And yeah, you can take photos of it. You can kind of invite your friends over for a socially distanced hangout, do it outside, look at the ballots and be like, what is this? I don't know that word. And you can Google things together. If you live in the same neighborhood, you probably have the same things on your ballot. So just get together and you can all talk about it together, make an event out of it. If you're going in person, bring a friend. You can still stay 6 feet away, bring your mask, but you can still bring a friend. I especially recommend this if you're trans and you have any issues with IDs. Mostly trans people aren't actually turned away at the polls. Mostly the issue is that we're too nervous to even try to show up in the first place. But by going with a friend, it's going to be a lot less nerve-wracking. It's going to be a lot more fun. And you're a lot less likely to be discriminated against if you have someone with you who's clearly going to have your back, and the poll worker can kind of tell, to be honest. So yeah, bring a friend. It just makes it a lot more fun and a lot more secure.
Thank you, Rigo. Maria, same question, please.
You know, I think voting has always been this kind of weird experience for me. I think from the days that I would have to go and show this sort of dead ID with this dead name. So I think a lot of the things that Rodrigo just mentioned are such big stresses for trans people just to go out and vote. I personally, I'm trying to educate myself to be able to, I'm not an expert in politics, but I think it starts with us educating ourselves on some of the issues so then we can share that information with our community. I think as trans people, we are really building our political power, right? Here in California, you know, the Trans Latina Coalition with other amazing trans-led organizations, you know, just passed Bill AB 2218 that was signed by Governor Newsom. That is historic because the majority of the organizations were organizations that focus on serving trans people of color. That is something that you know, it's taking years for us to be able to have the knowledge on how to do that. With the amazing mind of Michelle Pulido, who is our policy manager. And we're supporting people to get registered. I'm having conversations within community about why it's important to vote and be engaged. I'm having discussions with people who support and have other views aside from mine, and discussions about why is it that puts us all at risk. Because the truth is that a lot of people are voting against their own goodwill, their own health, which makes no sense to me. So I think those are some of the things that we're doing. I'm involved in talks like this. So these are things that we could do, but I think I love the idea of making it fun, that people can be engaged, because right now we've been saturated with so much horrible things for 4 years that I think anything that you could do with somebody that can entice other people to participate, sharing photos. We definitely share photos of food and all kinds of things, so why not share photos about one of the biggest steps that we can do to change the landscape of our country. So I tend to ramble. I hope I answered the question right.
You answered beautifully. Thank you, Maria. And last but not least, Louis, same question, please.
You know, at my professional job, I work with young people. So, you know, I got to echo what Kimberly said, you know, definitely working with young people throughout the year. I think a lot of times when elections come about, that's when some projects reach out to community. So it can really feel like this means to an end. Like you weren't here like last year, now you're here, it comes January, you won't be here again. So I think like, you know, just creating long-term plans and building those relationships so that when we are in these kinds of moments, we have people who trust us that we can activate. My son is turning 18 this month, so he will be voting for the first time. Yes, I have an 18-year-old son. I don't know how the hell that happens. But like, and you know, I can remember when I turned 18 and how nervous I was because voting wasn't something we talked about in the house. You know, I definitely knew that it was important through the Rock the Vote PSAs, like with Madonna and the Lights. Plug, which we just posted on Gravarones. So I knew that it was important because that messaging was important the same way it was important for me to get an education. It was important to me to eat my greens. But like, I didn't know like why it was important for me other than that, right? So like with my son turning 18, like explaining that, but also like asking like, are you nervous? Like, what do you feel about it? What do you feel about voting? Do you imagine yourself in that booth? Are you afraid of what button you're going to push? I know that I was. So I think that part of it keeps me humble. And then like hearing what he talks about with his friends online, sometimes it is jarring. I'm like, oh my God, y'all say a lot online. But also it reminds me that you know, there is work to be done, and for us not to assume that all of us have the same access to the same kind of information or the same kind of comprehension. And the last thing I would say is, you know, everyone in our communities are organizers. If you've ever planned a party or go to the club and you've said, you know what, Daniel, you're going to pick up Maria, Kimberly, meet me at my house, and Rigo, like you are an organizer, right? If you've ever done that, you are organizing your communities. And I know people have done that because you're like, come on, we get ready to go. We get ready to leave the club. I know that they're playing salsa music upstairs. Go get Maria. I know Rico's over here. Like, you know, you have it in you. So on November 3rd, you can access that same kind of natural instinct, who needs a ride, or who can you pick up from work, or who on their way can pick up who. We've been doing that for decades. We've been doing that for centuries. That's how our baby showers are. That's how our, our 1-year-old parties are, that, they're 1-year-old parties for 2 hours and then they're adult parties for the next 8. And that's because we know that not everyone has access to rides or transportation. So I would invite people to just plug into that. That is what we do to stay connected. And just to remind everyone who is out, viewing this, that you are an organizer, the abuela next door is your organizer, your tia, your cousins, and just to remind them of that. I think that goes a long way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Louis. Thank you so much. So now to our final question. Who are you taking with you in spirit to the ballot this year and why? I want to start with Maria Roman Taylorson.
I'm taking every trans person that I've met in my journey. I'm taking in spirit all the lives of my sisters and brothers that I continue to lose because of hate. I'm taking my ancestors, my grandmother, you name it. I'm taking them all. Los Santos, I'm taking everybody with me in spirit to vote. I think that this election, more than any other that I've experienced in my life, is critical to my people and our people's survival. I think that I'm going to stick the spirits of all those people with the hope that there will be a shift, right? Because we need a shift. We've had this for 4 years. We need a shift. We know that Miss Amy is going to try to pull some stunts, and we need something. And I'm hopeful, I'm energized, and I'm going to do anything in my power to make sure that we move in a different direction. Voy a prender velas, voy a sacar los santos del closet, whatever I need to do. Honey, sage myself. Yes, I'm ready.
Lo que sea necesario.
Whatever.
Los santos, todo lo que sea necesario.
Everything.
Thank you, Maria. Rigo, you're up.
I mean, for me, it's all the people who've been killed over the years because our lives aren't seen as important. I mean, in Puerto Rico alone this year, at least 6 transgender people have been killed. 5 were transgender women. And again, these are only the deaths that are reported. That there's probably more that we're not even aware of yet. So, I mean, and politics can sound distant. Politics can sound like, what does that have to do with the murders? But, it really has everything to do with it, because politics is what shapes how it's the government saying who counts and who doesn't. It's the government as people in authority saying these people's lives matter and these people's don't. So when the government comes after us and tries to chip away at our rights, that's the government telling everyday people that our lives don't really count like everyone else's lives do. So, I mean, when we get involved in politics and we do something like voting and we get our friends and family to vote, that really does change the message, and it really does make it so it's like the government is saying that we do matter and we are relevant and that we do deserve just as much protection as people who aren't Latino or people who aren't queer or trans. And one other thing I wanted to throw in there in the spirit of making voting easy is transformthevote.org. So if you're a transgender or you know somebody who is, and you have questions about IDs, first of all, just know that not every state requires an ID. So you might live in a place where you don't even need an ID, but you can find out whether or not you need one at transformthevote.org. And you can find out, get all your questions answered about what to bring, what to do if you face any issues. So yeah, transformthevote.org is a great resource. And if you're voting by mail, that's probably, if you're trans, voting by mail is probably the easiest thing for you to do. Again, everyone's life is different, but probably the mail is easy. And so I recommend getting it in early. Drop your mail in the ballot, in the mailbox like tomorrow, like for real. That way you don't have to stress about it. It's just done, it's off your list. And then you can start organizing your friends to do it too. So yeah, vote early.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rigo. Kimberly, your turn.
You know, like probably some of you who are watching, I've been watching these Senate hearings for the Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. You know, someone who poses such an incredible threat to the lives of, I think, everybody listening, right? Whether we're talking about, you know, people who can get pregnant, whether we're talking about queer and trans people, people of color. And I'm reminded of how imperfect our democracy is, because we have the Senate, this kind of elite, deeply unrepresentative body, sort of making this very quick decision about a judge who will then sit on the Supreme Court, which is this other, you know, unelected, very elite body, and they have so much control over our lives. And that is not to, that's not to dim anyone's light to be involved in our democracy. To me, the fact that our democracy is so imperfect is why we must speak up and speak out and vote whenever we can. Because when I think about, you know, the people of Washington, D.C. have no voice in these Senate hearings. They have no representation. The people of Puerto Rico have no voice in these Senate hearings. They have no representation. So when I think about, you know, who I'm taking with me, I am taking 3 million Puerto Ricanos who have to suffer the incompetence of this government, but have no vote and remain a colony. I'm taking with me the people of Washington, D.C., where I myself lived for many years, who do not have representation in this democracy. The undocumented people who live here and are part of our communities, but are not allowed to participate. So I think for me, it's all of the people who are part of our community in this country, but are blocked from that ballot. And that's who I bring in with me.
Thank you, Kimberly. Daniel, who are you bringing with you to the ballot box?
You know, a lot of folks have talked about all of the different communities that I think about when I go vote. But I think, as Louis mentioned earlier, it's about how personal the stories are, right, of the folks, and why it's important for you to go out to vote for folks. And so for me, it's two of my best friends. They're both queer. They both have DACA status. Their fate, like that of millions of DACA, TPS, and undocumented folk, are in the hands of people that we elect. And so they are as much American as me, and we need to do right by them. And so that's who I'm taking with me to the polls in spirit, and many, many others who have not been able to vote, but whose lives depend on who's elected. And so I think that those are the people that I think about, that personal connection that I have of how my vote could potentially impact the lives of people that I love.
Thank you, Daniel. And Louis, closing answer.
Wow. You know, I would echo with everyone says. And, you know, I think no matter what I do, I'm always taking the little boy in me that felt out of place, that didn't feel that they mattered, that watched this government's war on drugs decimate communities, to watch multiple family members succumb to the complications of AIDS. So they're always on my mind no matter what I'm doing, because I know what the great loss can be when there's an action. And I know that those losses can easily socialize us as adults to think that we don't have the power to make a difference in the small part of the world on this planet that we occupy. So I'm always taking the young person, the little Louis in me, who says, you are more than a faggot. You are more than, you know, what your mother said about you, because right here, right now, you are going to change the world, and you do it every day. So I take all of those little people who had to fight in order to believe that they mattered, so that they can forward that kind of belief and that notion to the people around them.
Thank you, Louis. Well, we've come to the end of the panel portion of our program. I'd like to thank Maria, Rodrigo, Kimberly, Daniel, and Louis for taking the time to share their brilliance with us today and their beautiful, heartfelt answers. Thanks to all of you also for sharing this important moment in time with us. And we hope to see a lot of you out there doing selfie your vote actions and sharing with your friends and making this a moment of connection. It's a very important moment in time for all of us as Latinx people. Now, to close off our program, We're happy to have a living legend from our community to talk about the need to escalate our voices. Richard Saldivar is the founder and the executive director of the Wall Las Memorias in Los Angeles. As a visionary, Richard led the effort to construct the first and only publicly funded AIDS monument in the nation. Under his leadership, the Wall Las Memorias provides health prevention and social justice programs to the LGBTQ, Latinx, and other underserved populations. Richard is also a political activist and leader. He started in government and politics at the age of 18. Over the years, he's managed political campaigns. He also served on the National Democratic Convention Platform Committee this past August, where he contributed his expertise on policy issues. Richard Saldivar is often called to speak to motivate audiences like he will do with us today. 2 years ago, he was the plenary speaker at the US Conference on AIDS in Florida in front of 3,000 people and received a standing ovation. Please help me welcome Richard Saldivar.
Thank you so much, Tony. I really do appreciate it. And congratulations to all of you on an incredible conversation. Good afternoon to all of you, wherever you may be. The election in November will be the most important election of our lifetime in the history of our nation. Either we can live with this authoritarian leadership of this president, or we can raise our voice in objections to his bigotry, racism, and defeat this dance with fascism that we are experiencing today. As an executive director of an LGBTQ HIV organization and a political activist for many years, I share with you my fear what might happen to us if we do not act today and if we don't act now. We can see our brothers and sisters continue to be beaten and killed at the hands of police officers. We can also see our people, our brothers and sisters, be beaten at the hands of Proud Boys and other white supremacist groups with the support of this administration. We've had a fight in the courts to extend the US Census, only to find out that it's ending tomorrow. An example of the bitter loss that we're going to face just in Los Angeles alone, we're about 25% undercount what we normally would be 10 years ago. So we're going to lose some House seats and we're going to lose funding. This administration threatens to our vote as they find every opportunity to discard our voice. This election matters. It's important for us to contact our friends and families wherever we may have these folks and let them know that this election's happening November the 3rd. Our immigrant families are afraid to walk down the street to the corner store because they're afraid of ICE may pick them up. For that reason, it's time to raise our voice and vote. Our transgender community are beaten up and killed in many cities across this nation, and we cannot let that happen. It is time to raise our voice and vote. Our free press is discredited as fake news and threatens us to learn truth in our society. It is time to raise our voice and vote. Black and Latino community members are beaten and many times killed. It is time to raise our voice and vote. Children of migrants are locked up in cages like animals in prison camps as they flee persecution from cartels or their own governments. It is time to raise our voice and vote. We are witnessing voter suppression in states where the election of our next president is going to matter. It's time to raise our voice and vote. My brothers and sisters, you have the power to lead our community in this urgent time with an urgent message. You have the opportunity to take some days off vacation, call in sick, and join a campaign to drive the votes out in this coming election. You can write the history that our younger generation can read about in school in decades to come. I pray to God that we will not let this moment pass, that we rise to the challenge before us, that we preserve the dignity of all humankind, that we protect the sanctity of our Constitution, and that we save our democracy. For we are all God's children, and we live in a great country, but it's our country, and that's what makes us great. So to all of you, Thank you so much for what you do in the community. Get out and vote and use a mask when you do it. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for your inspirational words. Thank you all for joining us today. Remember, like Richard said, remember to vote, get your friends to vote, your familias to vote, wear that mask, stay socially distant, take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great night.